Good evening, everybody. Evan Lazar alongside Alex Barth. As always, Patriots Beat live podcast following day 2 of Patriots mandatory minicamp. We're going to get into some attendance things just quickly right off the top, just to take care of the housekeeping. Jonnu Smith in attendance, but as a spectator, did not participate in practice. Stefan Gilmore still not there. Chase Winovich still not there. But Mac Jones and Cam Newton were there today, Alex, and it was another day where it felt like Mac is having some positive momentum, right? And Cam Newton is sort of teetering a little bit, or maybe even taking a step back. And I don't know. Look, I think a lot of people look at it as excuse making at this point with Cam when we talk about accuracy struggles and we blame it on hand injuries and stuff like that. But you do have to at least give him some sort of benefit of, is it the hand, right? Is that hand injury giving him these problems? But another day of erratic accuracy, another day of some positive steps from Mac Jones, even if he ended practice with those couple of interceptions. But I think the overarching question here is, Alex, and then I can get into some of the things, the actual individual plays that we saw, is I guess at what point does this sort of become a discourse of whether or not Cam Newton should be the starter in week 1? Like, when do we start having those types of conversations? Because right now it's very clear that Mac is building and stacking good day after good day after good day and looking better and better and better. So
we start having those conversations when Mac is still doing this when the pads are on.
Yeah.
When Mac is still doing this when there's full speed reps. When Mac does this in a preseason game, right? They open, I think, against Washington, right, in the preseason. When Mac plays better than Cam in that, when Mac plays better than Cam in that game, right, that's when we start having that conversation. Nothing wrong with pointing out right now that Mac has been better than Cam. And I'm not saying it means nothing, but these are half speed reps, rarely against the first team defense. There's a lot of, context we're missing with these reps because it's a teaching camp. They may be asking certain players to do certain things. So not yet. Now, when we get full speed, first team versus first team in camp, if Mac's still outplaying Cam then, and I'm not saying it will happen, I'm not saying it won't happen. I think there's a possibility it does, but I'm not going to guarantee it. If Mac's still outplaying Cam at that point, then we start having that conversation.
Yeah, I would say through 2 days right now, Mac Jones has outplayed Cam Newton in minicamp. And like you said, there's a lot of context that's needed. There are no pads. Not all of these drills are full live, right? So we're going, I think the highest that we might go up to, if we want to put a percentage on it, is probably somewhere around 75, 80%, right, in terms of full speed, right? So you have safeties kind of ranging over the top, and maybe they would have a big hit in a game to jar the ball loose, but they're obviously not going to lay out their teammate in minicamp. So we're taking a step back there. Or maybe in one instance, they're telling the defense, hey, well, these aren't really competitive drills. Let's let the passes kind of become complete, get to your spot, get in position. But if the ball is thrown your way, don't try to break it up, because we're just sort of going through the motions here. But when we get into some real competitive drills, I think what I'm seeing with Mac Jones is, first and foremost, he's definitely the more accurate quarterback, right? I mean, that's, I think, definitely what we've seen throughout these couple days in minicamp is a passer in Mac that understands ball placement, understands where to put the ball and where to put it, especially in the short and intermediate levels. And the other thing I would say was just a quicker trigger finger and just a faster process and a faster decision-making about Mac Jones's game. Now, sometimes that means getting to the check down quickly or getting to the throw in the flat quickly. But we saw Tom Brady kind of take those liberties for 20 years, right? Where sometimes the play down the field wasn't developing the way that he wanted. He'd dump it off to James White. They gained their 6 yards on first down, and they live to play another down, right? And those are the types of plays that you can consistently see Mac make out there at times, that Cam maybe holds the ball for a second longer, half a second longer. And that's, I don't think it looks, and we talked about this last year with Cam, it doesn't look like the Patriots offense as much when Cam is out there, right? It doesn't look like the stylistic fit is necessarily where you would want it to be, especially in year 2 in the system. So I don't know. I don't get too caught up in some of the accuracy stuff, and people post these videos of them throwing against air and Cam's air milling passes, and everybody makes a big deal out of that. It's more about the decision-making, the timing, the rhythm of the passing game when one quarterback is going out there versus another. And I don't know. It just sort of feels to me like Mac, you can just tell right away why they drafted this guy in the first round and why he fits what they want to do. Alex, we can't hear you for some
Yeah,
reason.
I'm muted.
Oh, there we go.
How that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's the guy. When you look back at it, and we were debating all these different types of quarterbacks. Yeah, you absolutely see why they drafted Mac. I mean, he's in control. He's not a major playmaker, but he's not going to make mistakes. And I think Cam's MO has always been. I don't want to say Cam makes a lot of mistakes because it sounds like a diss, and it's not. Cam's always been aggressive. Cam's style of play has always been he's going to make some incredible plays, but the flip side of that is he takes some chances. And that's why when they signed him in the first place, I was a little surprised because it's very against what the Patriots have always been. It was an interesting experiment, and it still is an interesting experiment when you take, a guy who really likes to and succeeds in breaking the system and extending plays and all of that and putting him with a coach who's very by the book and a system that's very by the book. But yeah, Mac is more like he's less of a departure from what they want to do, I think, than Cam is. And we heard Cam say it today, right? How tough the system was. And I don't know that they necessarily fit their calls to Cam as much as they tried to get Cam to fit what they wanted to do. And I think that split, right, that difference between those two, it is now even more prevalent when you have Mac Jones next to him, kind of in a system that's more comfortable for him than a guy like Cam Newton.
Yeah, Cam his entire career, even going back to Auburn, as a playmaker. Right, he's the guy that I'm not saying that he wants to run around like Russell Wilson or Michael Vick for 3.5, 4 seconds and make a throw. He was somebody that lived in that like 2.6 to 3 second release time, but he likes to hold the ball for that half a second longer and try to wait for things to develop down the field and try to push the football down the field and make plays from inside the pocket. That's always been Cam Newton's game. And the Patriots are a type of offense that you need to make a quick decision. When you see that the coverage is rotating one way, or you see that your first look isn't open another way, and you just have to get rid of the football, that's where the Patriots want you to live. They want you to get the football out in 2.5, 2.6 seconds, somewhere in that range on the lower end of the spectrum, and make sure you get that football just to somebody to let them catch and run with it, stay ahead of the chains, don't turn it over. That's the Patriots offense, and then you elevate it off your own, right? And what we've seen from Mac these last couple of days just continues to be that. And I thought what really stood out today was the red zone work and that quick decision making and processing from Mac in red zone, because that's when you can really see it times even out at these types of practices, because it's a condensed field, right? So you have a shorter condensed space that you have to be able to make these decisions faster because those windows are going to close even quicker. And what he did in the red zone work was throw 3 touchdowns on 8 of his passes. 3 of them went for TDs. I think he completed 6 or 7 out of 8. And what he did was just extremely quick through all of these progressions. And one of them was a stick nod to Hunter Henry, where he fakes like he's going to sit down the route and then he continues up the seam. And Mac just threw it over Kyle Duggar, made sure it was up and elevated so Hunter Henry could go up and get it in the back of the end zone. Touchdown. Then they came back and they ran a little out route with Devon Ossiacy against Adrian Phillips, matched up on the backside of the formation one-on-one. Ossiacy wins on the route. Mac Jones sees it, gets the ball out to Ossiacy, touchdown. Then they came back another play, and Matt Lacoste is crossing over the middle of the field against Duggar, and he throws it, kind of low and in outside of Duggar's coverage, and Matt Lacoste catches it, touchdown. These are the types of plays that you just see even in a red zone drill from Mac Jones, where he just continuously gets the football out, puts it where it needs to be, makes the right decision with it. And the fact that he's already doing that in June, it really bodes well. And I think what a lot of people get caught up in too is these are not these like wow downfield throws, right? Like it's not like he's out here throwing 40, 50-yard bombs on a rope, in perfect placement and stuff like that. But it still looks a whole lot more like what the Patriots want the quarterback position to do. And that's never, not that Brady didn't make great downfield throws, but the basis or the foundation of the Patriots offense was not necessarily those high-level downfield throws. That's what made Brady great, right? That's what put him over the top. But the foundation of the system was everything in between. And Mac right now is operating on a very good level in between. And when I watch how he is as a passer, I just kind of find it hard to believe that if he can take care of the football, and I guess that's a big if, but if he can take care of the football and do what he's doing now and sort of be that game manager and be that point guard of the offense, I don't know how Cam, the passer that we've seen so far this spring and last season, is going to be able to be better than that, unless Bill Belichick is really just counting on Cam's running game attributes contributing more than what Mac can as a thrower, right? Maybe Cam's legs put it more towards him.
Well, I think, Mac not turning the ball over, that's the whole thing. That's his whole deal, is he doesn't turn the ball over. Just to backtrack, to attach something you said there to something you said earlier, we had that red zone work today, right? That heavier red zone work. And yesterday they ended with the 2-minute drill. Yeah. So these are, you asked before, when can we start having the conversation about Mac Jones supplanting Cam Newton? Now we're getting the more, situationally specific, slightly more strenuous drills. These are I don't want to put a ton of weight into OTAs and minicamp, but if we're going to put weight on something, it's yesterday's 2-minute drill and today's red zone. So it's a good sign that he's performing well there.
Yeah. And Cam, other reporters have said the same thing. And look, I think Cam is a really physically talented player still, and I think that his running game attributes can still be really good. I don't see his arm strength as a big issue right now. It's ball control and accuracy down the field. And he had Hunter Henry on a deep crossing route. Hunter Henry was wide open by NFL standards, and he missed it by 3 or 4 yards, right? Just sailed it over his head. Then he had Kendrick Bourne working the left sideline on a comeback route and was nowhere near the target. And these are the types of throws that you see, and you just say, NFL QB, starting NFL quarterbacks, got to hit that throw. Cam Newton knows he's got to hit that throw, right? No one's breaking any news here, and I'm sure Cam would be the first one to tell people that that's a throw that he's got to have, or that's a throw that he's got to make. So we'll see. Day 3 is tomorrow. He's still got tomorrow to kind of correct this ship. I wonder if we come back in training camp and the hand is healed a little bit better, if we see a more consistent Cam Newton. But right now it's definitely been edge Mac. And we talked about this a little bit off the air, Alex. Jarrett Stidham's still tearing it up in 7-on-7s, right? I don't know if that means anything at all. 7-on-7s, there is no pass rush. There's really no detriment to the quarterback, right? There's nothing in the way of the quarterback. So you can stand back there, scan the field, and throw the ball freely and let it rip and step into every single throw you make and all that kind of stuff. It's so much easier. But Jarrett, you got to at least point it out that every time they go to 7-on-7, Jarrett Stidham looks like the best quarterback on the Patriots roster.
And I mean, that doesn't mean nothing, right? Cam Newton's only on a 1-year deal. And let's say Mac Jones supplants him and Mac Jones becomes a starter. You still need a backup.
Right.
And if he plays his way into a quality backup role behind Jones, that's, if your 4th round pick turns into a guy who's a 10, 15-year backup in the league, that's a hit. So it's not nothing. It's not nothing. But again, I just don't know that he can cover the ground he needs to get into that top 2 conversation.
He barely repped today. It was Mac Jones had 25 throws in competitive drills. Cam, I think, had maybe it was 17 throws in competitive drills. Stidham had 9, and Brian Hoyer had maybe 1 or 2. Right? That was.
I saw Hoyer didn't have any.
He might not have had any in true competitive drills, right? Yeah. So those are sort of the breakdown there. And Mac's already out repping Cam. I don't know if that's has anything to do with Cam's hand or not. But at the end of the day, Jarrett Stidham is pretty clearly quarterback 3 at this point on the depth chart.
Let me ask you this, and correct me if I'm off base here, but I'm just throwing this out. The pattern with Mac and Cam is kind of reminding me, it feels like it's kind of mirroring where Cam and Stidham were at this time last year when Cam came in and Stidham was still sort of the number 1, right? Remember, though, and it's a little different because OTAs and training camp were kind of just one thing, but for the first couple days, they talked about Stidham being the top quarterback, and they were neck and neck. And then it was about 4 or 5 days in that suddenly things just turned, and they started giving Cam more attention, and then he ran with it. He was having more success, and he became the number 1 quarterback. It feels like, and we're still early in that process, but it feels like that process is playing itself out again with Cam Newton. Excuse me, with Cam Newton playing the part of Jarrett Stidham, in Mac Jones playing the part of Cam Newton.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. I do think that there's a little bit of that going on. What I'm fascinated to see as we get into the summer and we get the pads on in training camp, there's really no run game stuff going on right now, right? Because it's unpadded practice, non-padded practice. So they are doing walk-through run drills, but they're not actually they're installing the basics of the run game from a mental perspective, but they're not just, installing it yet from a physical perspective until we get into actual training camp when the pads go on in late July. So the question is when we get to that point, like I said earlier, how do they kind of divvy that up? Right. And this would be a really interesting question to ask Bill Belichick if he would answer it honestly about, okay, you have a running quarterback in Cam, you have the total opposite in Mac Jones. And how do you sort of go about, well, maybe we want to install some read option stuff, and maybe we want to install some zone read or some gap read or some quarterback runs like they did last year with Cam. But your offensive line and your backs are not going to run that and not going to block that with Mac Jones. Right, they're not going to run the same system. So I do think what happened last year was when they got into the run game install portion of training camp, they said, wow, we can play 11 on 11. Cam is not that much better, or that much worse, I should say, of a thrower than Jarrett Stidham. So this is definitely a lot more valuable to us, right? And they kind of had to go there because it was so much more valuable. Stidham wasn't impressing anybody. And it was so much more valuable to run the football with Cam and have those packages in there than to not, that they went that direction. Mac Jones is going to have to outshine Cam so much with his arm that it's worth putting a stationary quarterback back there. Last year, Jarrett Stidham didn't make it worth it, right? And that's sort of the dichotomy here. That's the conversation that we have to have is Mac going to be so much better as a passer that it's going to outweigh Cam Newton's run game adaptations? And I don't think we're here yet, but I see some people in the chat talking about the Taysom Hill role and things like that for Cam Newton. And I don't know if Bill Belichick would necessarily go with that full dual quarterback type of system, but I wouldn't completely rule it out based off of what we've seen in training camp, or in minicamp, excuse me. I do think that there's a possibility that could be on the table if things progress this direction.
So the one I've talked about, and I would encourage people to watch, and I know it's a little different because it's college versus the pros, but the Blake Bell at Oklahoma, when he was the backup for Landry Jones, they called him the Belldozer. I think that package, because they used Taysom Hill as a receiver. I know Cam caught a touchdown last year, but how refined?
No, he's not going to be a receiver. If he comes in, it's going to be short yardage, goal line.
So that's why I'm saying I think what Oklahoma did with Blake Bell, early 2010s, I forget the exact, it was 2 years, and then he became the starting quarterback the next year. He's now a tight end with the Chiefs. But go look at what Oklahoma did with Blake Bell. Go watch some of those packages. That, to me, is what the Patriots, if they go with, if Mac Jones is the starter, but there's a Cam Newton short yardage package. And by the way, they didn't only use it in short yardage. They'd use it on 2nd and 5 because they just knew they could pick up, in the middle of the field, because they just knew they could pick up 5 yards on the ground. It was more about the sheer size and strength of the personnel was so tough to stop, even if you knew it was coming. And we all remember that Patriots goal line formation that was great last year, except for the one play they needed it in Seattle. But that, go watch that package. Go watch some of those highlights, some of those clips. I get Taysom Hill's an exciting name, but the real comp for me is Blake Bell, the Belldozer from the University of Oklahoma. I think that would be really cool to see them implement some of that offense.
Yeah, they also have some shades of early Tebow at Florida, right? Because Chris Leak was the starting quarterback there. Urban Meyer put Tebow in certain packages in certain situations, and as sort of the running. In college, they've done this all the time, right? It's definitely more a college thing than an NFL thing. Cam is not going to go out there and play wide receiver and play tight end like Taysom Hill. Maybe they could have some sort of a trick play where Cam goes out wide and some sort of wildcat type of thing, right? But they're not going to actually have Cam play wide receiver or tight end, whatever you want to call Taysom Hill. He's not going to do that. But both quarterbacks having a role on the team is theoretically possible, I guess. And I wouldn't completely rule it out if things continue to progress in this direction. I also wanted to, before we move over to the defense, Alex, I wanted to talk about Devon Ossiacy because we didn't get to talk about him yesterday. He's had a really nice spring. I thought he had another good practice today, running crisp routes, breaking the routes off at the right depth, getting a lot of kind of applause from the coaching staff, from Nick Caley and Josh McDaniels out there at practice. Everyone seems to be pretty thrilled with what they've seen from his sort of development and how he's carrying over what he learned and what he did at the end of last year into this season. But obviously they signed these two tight ends and Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. So is there a role or is there even a snaps or opportunity for Devon Ossiacy to get on the field? We talk about the Belldozer and Cam Newton playing kind of as that like mobile quarterback option. Is it crazy to think that they could go three tight end at some point or get really wonky with the formations to get Ossiacy on the field if he's truly playing this well? Because he's looked extremely good in this camp.
Sure. So I, in the Belldozer package, I don't know, because at that point you're prioritizing blocking. That's more so you're putting Justin Herron out there as your third tight end in that formation. But could they go with some, what would that be, 13 personnel offense or even 03?
Right.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's a possibility. It's just, and Matt Lacoste is having a good camp too. I don't know that he's, been quite as impressive as Devon Ossiacy, but these guys are it's early, but performing well. And it's going to be interesting to see. It's a good problem to have if you're the Patriots. Either you figure out a way to get this guy some snaps or he's going to have trade value. Ossiacy's a little different because he's only been here for a year, but there probably is a way, especially, Nelson Aguilar's had a couple rough days here, right? If the receivers stumble out of the gate, if Aguilar stumbles out of the gate, if Bourne's a little slow catching up because he's new, if Jacoby Myers doesn't make the jump we think he might make, and he's looked good, it's nothing against him, but the way this team is built, they're really set up in a way where just put the 5 best skill position players out there and then figure it out from there. And I think they've never been afraid to do that before. Bill's never been afraid to get funky like that. And if that means making 13 personnel or 03 personnel a somewhat regular set, try it out, do it, see what happens. I don't think they'd be opposed to that if, they're not going to force it. If Ossiacy regresses once we get to training camp and the pads come on, no. But if he's still performing really well and you think we need this guy on the field, we are the best version of our team when this guy is on the field, then yeah, I think it absolutely needs to be a consideration.
It would be fun. I mean, look, you can have Hunter Henry play the X, right? You can have Jonnu Smith play sort of as an H-back type of role off the line of scrimmage. And
they're
then
not
maybe
going to be traditional tight ends 3 at a time.
Right. And then maybe Devon Ossiacy is your traditional Y inline tight end because he has shown that ability to do that both in college and a little bit last year. It's possible. It's theoretically possible to get all 3 of those guys on the field and have a formation that makes sense and not have it be like you're lining up 8 guys across the line of scrimmage, right? And have it sort of be unique. Now, to me, if you're going to go
just real quick on that, I wonder, because you mentioned that, right? And we're talking, most people hear 3 tight ends, they think 13. I wonder if 03 is almost the preferable formation, and they use Jonnu Smith as a running back like they used to use Aaron Hernandez. And that's how you get the 3 on the field.
Yeah, they can definitely hand it off to Jonnu Smith.
Yeah.
But if they do go that route, and you don't decide this just because you have 3 good tight ends, but if you do go that route, it does feel a little bit like what Baltimore has done in the past where they've had 3 tight ends in there to block for Lamar Jackson. So it does it does lend itself a little bit to more of a running quarterback than somebody like Mac. But at the same time, there's still plenty of fakes and little gimmicks that you can do in the backfield to kind of make that thing work. But you are going to be more of a power team at that point, and you're not going to really have the speed out there because these are tight ends, not wide receivers. So there has to be some sort of balance there. But I certainly think that all 3 of those guys, Johnny hasn't really practiced, but Hunter Henry looks great. He looks like Hunter Henry. Obviously, Devon Ossiacy, as we've been saying, is having a great camp. All 3 of those guys have a role on this team and can contribute in some sort of way. Also wanted to talk about Nikhil Harry on the offensive side of the ball. He has slimmed down. Right, and I tweeted about that yesterday. Everybody rolled their eyes at me. It's okay. He has slimmed down. He's down to somewhere around 210. He weighed in, I think, at 228 at the Combine in 2019 before the Patriots drafted him in the first round. So he slimmed down quite a bit since where he was drafted. And I think he saw this offseason in the draft last year when they took 2 tight ends in the 3rd round. And he says they've added 4 tight ends in the last year, 2 of them big-time free agent signings, 2 of them top 101 picks. bulking up and getting bigger is not going to get me on the field or get me targets, right? I got to slim down, be more explosive. And to me, what it looks like is Nikhil Harry is at least trying to be that X receiver that they've been missing, right? That sort of last piece to the puzzle. We talked about Julio kind of filling that role. It's not exactly Julio, but that's sort of what the vibe I'm getting, is that Nikhil Harry is more focused on getting faster, getting lighter to play on the outside and not necessarily moving back inside.
And it's a shame because I've talked about this before, right? And it comes down to, if that's the player they want, why did they take Nikhil Harry? They're just trying to turn him into a completely different player. So maybe it works. But you're asking a guy who's been doing things a certain way for 15, 20 years to suddenly start doing them a different way. It just, it feels desperate at that point. We've seen this attempted with players around the league before, and it doesn't always work. So it just goes back to, if you wanted the smaller, quicker receiver, AJ Brown was there, Terry McLaurin was there. So it's just, it's an odd choice.
It's been an odd choice for a while now, especially seeing what everybody else has done. The fact that it still haunts me that if they were really looking for that big time outside receiver and they drafted Nikhil Harry over DK Metcalf, I just can't figure that one out, right? If you're looking for the big bodied outside explosive weapon at the X, like DK Metcalf was right there. Right. I don't know. We don't have to revisit that entire draft. A bunch of questions in the chat as well about Dalton Keene. I wish I could tell you something exciting that Dalton Keene has done. He's been out there. He's been participating, especially more so today compared to yesterday. He doesn't have any notable catches. I don't know. Look, Ossiacy, I think, is safe for now unless they really get something good in a return in a trade just because of his great preseason or something like that. I don't know where they go with Keene because I don't think he's going to have much trade value unless he goes off against like 4s and 5s in a fourth quarter of a preseason game or something like that. And he's not doing a whole lot out there this week. So we'll see, I guess. I don't know. Maybe he can start turning it on a little bit more in training camp. Did you see anything out of him yesterday? Because it just doesn't feel like he's involved at all.
No, not really. And I guess the one thing I did notice, which if anything was discouraging, is so the fullback Jakob Johnson right now, right?
Yeah.
He normally works with the tight ends. Occasionally he bounces to the running backs. Like, he kind of goes back and forth when they're in positional drills. And when he jumped from the tight ends to the running backs yesterday, Dalton Keene didn't. And so that tells me that they're not, at least seriously considering giving him a more traditional fullback kind of role, which is how he might have a better chance to get on the roster. So it's a small thing. I'm not saying, he didn't follow Jakob Johnson, work with the running backs, he's as good as cut, he'll never make it in this league. It's not that, but I didn't see anything that made me think, there's going to be a role for this kid.
Maybe they can get something for him in return if he has a decent preseason.
I guess let me add this too, just to be fair to the kid. He did have a neck injury last year, and I believe he had one in college too. And you might not come back the same from that. That's the kind of thing where it can completely change the way you play the game, especially at that position where you need to be physical. If you have a neck injury and you're told, you came this close to whatever happening to you, it's good. You're probably going to be a little less willing to go head first into contact. So I don't totally fault the kid. I think that the neck injury probably wasn't talked about enough last year when people talked about why he wasn't playing. I think, because remember, he didn't play for the first, whatever it was, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. And people are like, why won't you play the kid? I'll never fault the team being careful with a guy with a neck injury, a back injury, a head injury. So I don't want this to turn into us tearing it to Dalton Keene, because I think what he dealt with last year was probably more serious than we realized. And sometimes that changes the way you view the game, and it can change the way you play the game, and that's unfortunate.
I also want to mention, this is nothing to do with Dalton Keene, right? Like, Dalton Keene did nothing wrong necessarily. I think he was overdrafted, and that's a front office Bill Belichick decision, right? That's not anything on Dalton Keene. I think we get on these players individually. You get drafted with the 101st pick in the draft, and people expect something out of you. It's not Dalton Keene's fault that Bill Belichick drafted him 3 rounds too early. Right. That's if he comes in and he's a 6th or a 7th round pick, we're having a much different conversation. But because of where they drafted him, there's expectations. So that's what it is, and that's on the front office. That's on the GM for making the pick and putting those expectations on a player that never really made sense at that point in the draft. And to me, that has nothing to do with Dalton Keene. Let's talk about the defense. It was another good day for the pass rush, and this was a big thing I wanted to touch on as well, Alex. I'm not sure how much stock I want to put into these pass rush reps because there is no pads, there is no contact. The offensive line is at an inherent disadvantage in these mini camps. But with that being said, Josh Uche, Dante Hightower, Henry Anderson, Christian Barmore, Adrian Phillips got in on a blitz. The Patriots pass rush has lived in the backfield through the OTA practices, through the 2 minicamp practices this week. That pass rush is big time. And on top of that, they're doing all of this without Chase Winovich even out there. So they have another pass rusher that's very, very good. That's not even in the mix yet, but for whatever reason I can't figure out, but he's not there. So they just have droves and droves of different groupings, different looks, different pressure schemes, different everything. And they got experienced guys in Van Noy and Hightower and Judon coming in that you can just kind of mix and match and do a bunch of different things with. This has a scary, scary group on paper, and we're starting to definitely see it a little bit on the practice field as well.
Yeah, I mean, I want to put stock into it because they've looked so good, right? And you have to kind of give yourself pause. I think Chase Winovich not being there is an interesting development. I said yesterday I didn't want to talk about it, give him the benefit of the doubt. Bill Belichick mentioned travel restrictions, possibly, halting some guys getting there on time, but maybe he's dealing with an injury. I should throw that caveat on. We don't know why he's not there, but this is a guy who, if he can be there, needs to be out there. It is a very competitive edge group, pass rush group right now. And it looks like everybody's getting better. Josh Uche looks like he's set to take a massive leap. I even think a guy like Kyle Van Noy, who's at this point a seasoned veteran, a guy you don't expect to I'm not saying I thought Kyle Van Noy would suck, but you don't expect guys that age to take this massive jump. I think he's looked incredible. I think he looks like a completely refreshed
He's been everywhere.
player.
He had a pick again today. He's been in the backfield a little bit. He's been all over the place and all over the formation too, playing on the end of the line, right, like he did his last year here, also playing a little bit at inside linebacker. They have so much talent in that front seven, and then they also got Kyle Duggar to throw in there as well, and he's been playing a decent amount in the box with Adrian Phillips too, so they have those kind of money backer players too. Ronnie Perkins has been a little bit quiet. I think he's still swimming in it a little bit. I was going
to say, right now, Ronnie Perkins and Christian Barmore, you can't, they're not necessarily standing out, but they're going to start picking things up. So as competitive as that group is now, you're going to see Barmore and Perkins start to gain momentum, and Chase Winovich is probably fighting for a role. I don't know that he's fighting for a roster spot, but I think he's fighting for a role, and he's not going to be able to do that if he's not on the field.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Ronnie Perkins is still in a very much in a learning curve right now. And a big reason why is I talked about this after they drafted him. Ronnie Perkins was a hand-in-the-dirt defensive end at Oklahoma. He was a 4-3 end in their scheme, and he played a lot in a 3-point and even sometimes in a 4-point stance. Now with the Patriots, they're asking him to play up on his feet in a 2-point stance as an outside linebacker in a 3-4. So there's going to be a little bit of a transition there in terms of what he's doing and his role and things like that versus what he was doing at Oklahoma. At Oklahoma, he was an interior player that was allowed to shoot into the backfield, make plays behind the line of scrimmage, and aggressively attack the line of scrimmage. Here, he's going to have to set the edge. He's going to have to do things a little bit differently. So I think that's a little bit of a learning curve for Ronnie Perkins. Christian Barmore has been in the backfield a lot. He was in the backfield on Mac Jones' second interception. I couldn't tell if he was the one that got his hand on it, but he was certainly the one that made Mac Jones move off his spot, and eventually the ball was batted down at the line of scrimmage and into Kyle Van Noy's hands. So Christian Barmore is already making a little bit of noise, just rushing the passer. He looks like somebody that is definitely going to have the ability to play that early career Adam Butler role, right? Just come in on third downs, second and long, and rush the passer. I think that's going to fit right in with Christian Barmore. It's in droves, right? Because even when they go to like sort of their second group, right? So the first group for the most part has been just at the linebacker position has been Judon, Van Noy, and Hightower, the 3 veterans, right? And then they go to that second group, and here comes Uche, right? And Uche has just been unblockable, especially the backup tackles, Will Sherman, Corey Cunningham. Those guys have had all sorts of trouble blocking Uche for going on a month now, going back to OTAs. So that group is just extremely deep. Uche is having a fantastic camp, and they almost have to figure out a way to get him on the field because they have so much veteran depth ahead of him that they're going to have to figure that out. It's going to be really, really fun to see this group come together. and you can kind of see how it's going to help out the secondary a ton. I asked Evan McCourty about that. He kind of downplayed it, right? He didn't want to say like, yeah, this is going to make our life a whole lot easier because it's all on paper right now. But you can definitely feel when you're out there in the secondary, you don't have to cover as long. The ball is not going to be delivered as accurately sometimes because there's going to be pressure in people's faces. You can see how it's going to marry up and kind of aid the secondary as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the secondary is a whole completely different question with Stefan Gilmore. And I don't know if we want to get into that, we can get into that, but they're going to need their pass rush this year. They're going to need their pass rush this year badly. And looks like, was it Matt Judon, I think, said today, I want to say we'll be the best pass rush group in the league. We have to work at it to get there. If they do put in the work, they're going to have a chance to be the best defensive front in the league. I believe that.
One of the best for sure, at least on paper as of right now. And I think Gerard Mayo and Steve Belichick they're the ones kind of calling the plays out there right now in these practices. I think they're just having fun with it, right? Like, let's just they're throwing a bunch of different looks at these quarterbacks, and there's free runners often in these practices. Some of the times that they get on the same page and get it blocked, but this has been a big time pass rush camp, in a camp that really isn't supposed to be about the pass rushers, right? It's really supposed to be more about the quarterbacks, the receivers, and the defensive backs. The Patriots D-line and pass rush in general, with the linebackers in there as well, have sort of stolen the show a little bit. Before we talk about Stefan Gilmore, because I do want to talk about that again, Jalen Mills had a much, much better day today. I kind of ragged on him a little bit for what he's done on outside corner. Today he was all over the football, and he was all over the field too, right? He played almost had an interception playing deep. Cam Newton, Nelson Aguilar made a nice play to kind of play defense on it and break it up and save the interception. Then he comes down. He had great coverage on Isaiah Zuber playing on the outside. Then he played a little bit over the slot or kind of in the box. Devon McCourty talked about Mills after practice, just said this is a guy that we can already tell can just play everywhere. And that's really valuable in this system, in this scheme, whether it's at outside corner, slot, box safety, deep safety. He can play pretty much every single spot in the secondary. That's why, just kind of segueing into Stefan Gilmore too, it feels so much more valuable, the Jalen Mills signing, if they allow him to sort of be a jack of all trades. If Stefan Gilmore isn't here, then he's going to have to play outside corner, right? If Stefan Gilmore is here, then they can allow him to move around and kind of put out fires and just go where he's needed. So I guess we could talk about Mills a little bit, or we can talk about Gilmore too and how it feeds into the two things. But a much better day from Jalen Mills out there today, who had one of the best. I would say he's probably the practice player of the day.
That's encouraging. That's definitely encouraging. Like you said, I thought he struggled yesterday, and wherever he is, they're going to need him. Ideally, it's not at outside corner, at least not primarily. I think he's at his best in the box, but if he has to play out there, you want him to play well. So there you go.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Stefan Gilmore's situation. Bill Belichick this morning confirming that Stefan Gilmore, the team does not expect Stefan Gilmore to be there tomorrow. He wasn't there today. He's not coming to mandatory minicamp. He's not reporting to mandatory minicamp. All over his social media right now, there's players, Jalen Ramsey, Nuke Hopkins, the guys in Arizona, trying to recruit Stefan Gilmore to come from the Patriots to their teams. This situation, Stefan Gilmore, I believe he had some Patriot stuff in his bio on Twitter that's no longer there. So all the little social media, kind of hints and stuff like that, as we talk about and overanalyze, all those things are starting to come out now with Stefan Gilmore. I think the question of what does Stefan Gilmore want from the Patriots is a really interesting one. Does he
does still have New England Patriots in his Instagram bio.
Okay. All right. That's good. What does he want from the Patriots is an interesting combo. Does he want incentive to play this year and just a bonus to play this year and then hit free agency? There are some rumors out there that he's kind of looking at Darius Slay's contract, which was $3 for $16 million a year, as sort of a benchmark of what he would want for his last deal. What does he want from the Patriots? Should the Patriots be willing to do it? We are continuing to bang the table for the Patriots doing this because it just feels like the defense isn't whole without Stefan Gilmore.
So I wrote about this morning for 985thesportshub.com. I don't know that it's one specific thing. I don't know that you can say, oh, he wants tenure. Oh, he wants cash. I think it can go a number of different ways. I think if they were to say, hey, we'll give you $20 million this year and then you're a free agent, I think he would take that. If they said, hey, we'll give you, $12 million a year, but we'll sign you for 5 years, I think he'd take that. So it comes down to splitting the difference. It's going to be a compromise. We talked about this on the show yesterday. Gilmore's going to turn 31 week 2 of this season. Last year, there were only 10 corners in the league, age 31 or older, and none of them were true number one corners. None of them were close to Stefan Gilmore. So you throw that caveat on, but you also kind of see like, hey, there appears to be a wall here. The way things have gone in recent history, when corners hit the age 30, 31, 32, their play starts to drop off. Do you want to commit 3, 4, 5 years to a guy who's about to turn 31? If you don't and you want to keep him, you're going to have to pay him a ton of money, because he's looking for that last big contract. And I bet, we see teams do this all the time. If a team feels like they're close, they'll give a guy who maybe they shouldn't give a long-term contract, a long-term deal. They'll front load it, and they know, hey, we have like a 2-year window. It's going to be a mess after that anyway. So let's capitalize on this 2-year window. And if we have to carry the bad contract, we carry the bad contract. So we do. It's how teams operate. So I don't know that it's a definitive, hey, yeah, Stefan Gilmore wants 4 years, and anything less than that, he's not coming back. I don't know. It's Stefan Gilmore wants $20 million this year. He's not coming back. I think that there's probably some middle ground. It's just finding out what it is. I think the comp is, why am I blanking on his name, in Philly?
Darius Slay. I just pulled up Darius Slay's contract information, because this is what I want to talk about.
I don't think there's a great comp, and teams do this all the time. This is commonplace. You look at similar situations around the league. This is how
agents and teams negotiate, right. 100%. So
Slay signed this deal at age 29, so he was 2 years younger, but he's also, I don't think he's at the same echelon that Gilmore is. So This isn't a perfect comparison. Let's keep that in mind, but I think this is as close as you're going to get.
Right. So Albert Breer of MMQBSI, he reported, I think yesterday, that Gilmore's agent is using this Darius Slay contract as the comp, right? They're saying, this is what we want. Stefan Gilmore is a little bit older, but he's a better player than Darius Slay. So it kind of, they think it evens out, right? The age gap evens out. So in 2020, at age 29, Darius Slay signed a 3-year, $50 million deal with $26 million guaranteed. So that's an average annual salary of $16.7 million. But really, what's more important is the real money, the yearly cash flow. And what you're looking at is mostly kind of like a 2.5-year deal, right? You can get out of it after that point. That's sort of what you're looking at. And you're looking at carrying about a $15 million dead cap hit if you're Philadelphia, if you were to cut Darius Slay now in the second year of that deal. So that's a pretty hefty dead cap, and that's sort of how these deals are made. Now, the Eagles, as they often do, I believe they stacked voided years onto this contract.
There's 2 voided years.
Yeah, that's Philly's MO, and it's really coming back to haunt them now that their team isn't as competitive. But regardless of that, that's a possibility, and we see that becoming more and more commonplace across the league as these teams tacking on those dummy years at the end of the contract to spread out the cap hits. The Patriots would actually, if they used voided year structure, they could actually lower their cap hit this year and create more cap space for their team in the short term. It would just stretch out, and Stefan Gilmore would be on the books for longer.
Let's not forget. So Stefan Gilmore's due $7.5 million. The way that they forwarded his money right from this year to last year, at this time last year, his cap hit's more than double his actual money. It's like 16 something.
Yes.
And I think that doesn't go up, right? If they restructure the deal.
They can spread it out, right? So they can actually lower his cap hit in 2021. A big reason why it's 16.3 million is because they kept on giving him those salary conversions to create cap space in the short term to, I hate to say it, but sign guys like Antonio Brown, for example, right? And bring in talent for Tom Brady, Mohamed Sanu, these types of players that they were adding in 2019, in 2018, and 2020 to make the team better. Now they converted salary to signing bonus for Stefan Gilmore a couple times. They gave him that bonus last year, salary advance essentially last year, that's now hitting the books now. So that's sort of what's happening from a cap perspective and why his cap hit's almost double. The Patriots, I feel like, for the most part, try to avoid voided years or dummy years onto contracts. But nowadays, it's a different game. And with the cap just going through the roof in the future once we get off over the pandemic and into the new TV deal and stuff like that. They're going to have the money to be able to afford a cap hit for Stefan Gilmore and avoid a year situation. So that's the comp is Darius Slay. It makes sense for both sides. And 3 years is not a bad deal for the Patriots to commit to Stefan Gilmore.
So what I would say, like, I look at it and I wonder if the compromise is you use this deal. There's probably a little more money in it. You're probably looking at 3 over 60, right?
Yeah.
With 20 million guaranteed. Use this deal, but wipe out the current 2021 contract Gilmore has, and this is year one. 2021 becomes year one of that 3-year extension. I think that's, you're going to Gilmore's probably going to maximize his money realistically that way. And if you're the Patriots, 31 and 32 are the 2 big years you're focused on, right? This way you're not paying him through 34, where a 34-year-old corner last year would have been the second oldest corner in football. So I look at, and I don't know, enough about the cap. You'd have to ask Miguel Benzon, how that would work. But I believe there's a way in theory to wipe out what exists right now for 2021 or absorb it into the extension. And then it's a 3-year extension that covers 2021, 2022, 2023. And then if you want to use void years after that, you can. But those are the 3 years you really have.
Sure. No, they can just simply rip up Stefan Gilmore's contract and sign a new one. And that's how you would be able to get the extension, the new contract to start now instead of starting next year.
So that's what I would do. I would use, because when Slay signed his deal, it was a 3-year extension, but he played under his old deal in 2020, right? When the extension was signed, and then it kicked in another year. If I'm looking at, and so you're saying, well, then why not have Gilmore just, a 2-year deal? Because you need to fix this year as well. And it's, hey, we're going to fix this year. But instead of giving you the real 3 years Darius Slay got, it's really going to be 2. And we're going to fix this year for you and make you real comfortable and nice for you in 2021. That's, I think, the best way to go about it for both sides.
I like that idea.
That or essentially just de facto franchise tag him this year and say, we're going to give you $25 million. You put the poison pill in and say, we're going to make you the highest paid corner in football this year. We'll go right up to the cap. And then after that, we're parting ways.
We talked about it a lot at the quarterback position, Alex, going into the draft, where we said you don't have this huge offseason of free agent spending and then pass on the first round quarterback, right? And they agree with us. They went and they drafted Mac Jones, right? They said, we signed all these veteran free agents. We signed all these veteran pass catchers. Why not, right? This is the perfect time for us to sign to draft the first round quarterback, get the quarterback on a cheap deal, and let the young guy build through a veteran system, right? Perfect time. Right. I think this is a similar situation in that you don't have this big of an offseason. You don't draft Mac Jones. You don't sign all these players in free agency and then cheap out on Stefan Gilmore and put yourself in a position where you're compromised at outside corner. That seems to me like a major step backwards. And every time I go out to these practices, it just feels like how much better would this defense be and how much more whole would this defense be if 24 is out there. Right. Yeah. The whole puzzle for all 3 phases, really, the whole team comes together once they get Stefan Gilmore back in the building.
I said it on Zolak and Bertrand yesterday. I think having Gilmore changes the entire context of what this football team is. I think you go from a team that is going to be around 500 and will win some fun games to a team that it should win a playoff game or 2. So it makes all the difference in the world if they can get him back.
Yeah, so that's a situation.
That being said, don't totally mortgage your future.
Yeah, you never want to totally mortgage the future, but they definitely, having Mac Jones under contract for the next 5 years on a rookie deal definitely takes care of a lot of things, right? Like that, they should have plenty of money to play with for years to come. They're going to have money, even though they went out and signed all these free agents, they're going to have more cap space next year. They have some big free agents that they have to take care of, but they're going to have even more cap space next year because Mac Jones is cheap. So that they're going to continue to be able to foster cap space. They have $15 million right now, according to Miguel, that they can carry over into next year. That's my sort of just quickly. That's kind of my concern about giving Stefan Gilmore just a bonus or a raise for this year and just calling it a day, because that cuts into that cap space that they currently have. So if you give him a $6 million raise and that cap number that Miguel has at $15 million right now drops to $9 million, that's less carryover, yada, 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 you know the drill. So to me, an extension of some sort, like you said, is in kind of the framework that you said would be the best for both worlds. anything else that you want to hit on that we haven't hit on from the last 2 days of training camp? We're going to be back on the show, our mini camp. I keep saying training camp. For mini camp, we're not at training camp yet, Evan. Thursday we'll be back on the show, and we'll kind of recap everything that happened this week, sort of look at some burning questions that still remain as we head into the summer. But is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want to take a second to point out?
No, I mean, we got pretty thorough yesterday, Colbert and Zuber and that stuff. Again, I just think it's, take everything that comes out with a grain of salt, and, it's no insult to you, anybody else covering practice, me. No. I mean, I just want to remind everybody of that, because I feel like, we put stuff out there and people jump all over it, and I get it. I do that. I've done it. I still do it at times, and you just have to remind yourself that they're wearing helmets and no other pads. This is really a step above backyard football is all it is at this point. And there are certain things you can learn from this period, and we've kind of talked about that, right? But this isn't the be all end all. And there's a chance that some of these narratives we've talked about, are completely different a day or two into training camp. So see what happens. Smash that like button.
It happens every single year that we fall in love with some player in mini camp, and then the pads go on, and the whole thing changes. The whole conversation changes, and everything's different. I do think that Bill Belichick has said multiple times, this is a learning period. This is a sort of a developmental period right now, not an evaluation period. And what we have seen in terms of the media is always going to evaluate, right? And we're always going to look at everything. We're always going to overanalyze everything. And
we can't just go out there and be like, yeah, we saw some stuff today, but none of it matters.
Right. It's our job to report and tell you guys what we see and what's going on at these practices. So obviously we got to say something, like Alex is saying. Now, the one thing I will say, though, is that as we get into these practices, and this is, to me, laying that foundation. And what I have seen at the quarterback position is Mac Jones lay a foundation to make himself viable to start for the Patriots in week 1, right? Like literally really make this a quarterback competition, a true quarterback competition, not one of those fake ones that the media overhypes, a true quarterback competition. And I think that these 3 days or these 2 days, and if he has a good day tomorrow, that has solidified that to me that this could legitimately be a real quarterback competition. That's going to be a whole lot of fun this summer if it's a real one, because last year it was kind of a fake one. Like it just really wasn't as fun as it ended up sounding, right? Like Cam kind of stumbled into it. Jarrett Stidham never really pushed that hard for it. So it was kind of just like, here it is, Cam. Right?
It was competition by attrition.
Yeah. This hopefully will be a real competition.
Yeah.
Yes. So Alex and I will be back on the show on Thursday. We'll break down Wednesday's mini camp practice, but we're going to kind of look at it from more of a big picture perspective of the 3 days as a whole and where the team is at moving forward as we head into the dead period in the summer. We'll also answer some questions. I know that everybody's got the player they want to hear about that we haven't mentioned, right? I see it in the
might
chat
have to do time. Just go down the roster.
Rapid fire.
Each player.
Yeah. We could do like a rapid fire of like every player you guys put in the chat. We'll give a 30-second take on each one and go as fast as we can through as many as we can. So maybe we'll do that. That's a good idea, Alex. Maybe we'll do that in the next pod, in the second half of the pod, after we talk a little bit about what happened on Wednesday and sort of the mini camp as a whole. But until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody.